Hello and welcome to News Desk. I'm Forrest Whiting.
And I'm Melissa Chan.
Global stock markets fell, the US dollar rallied, oil prices jumped and world leaders were forced into crisis mode. That was the immediate response to Donald Trump's trade war threats. Trump may have delayed imposing tariffs on his neighbours Canada and Mexico, but no such reprieve for China, which has already hit back with its own tariffs. And who knows what's in store for Europe. But it's not like Trump didn't talk openly about his love of tariffs in the run-up to the election.
So we're going to charge tariffs to all these foreign countries that are coming in and ripping us off and taking our jobs.
You have to make your product in America.
To me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff. The most beautiful word in the dictionary.
I stopped wars with the threat of tariffs.
I'm going to impose a tariff on the outside world, and they're going to pay it.
So that was Donald Trump's pre-election tariff warning. And now he's making good on that promise. So this week we're discussing how the world is fighting back against Trump's tariff threats.
Yeah, and around the table we have Jared Reed, who has been following this changing, fast-moving story.
Absolutely.
So we really look forward to hearing what you have to sort of report out and present to us. And sitting opposite me is Pablo Foley Elias, who is going to be in chat, checking out your comments and questions, as will I. And we're going to try to bring in as much of your content as possible.
That's great, Melissa. And don't forget, of course, about the poll.
Yeah,
which we have.
I'm going to just talk to you about that in a second, but let me just also bring in or introduce to you our other guests who will be joining us a little bit later in this stream. First of all, we will have Alexandra von Nahmen, and she is DW's Brussels Bureau Chief. So she will be talking about Donald Trump, those threats of tariffs and what EU leaders are trying to mitigate for should that happen. And a little bit later, we will be talking to Stormy-Annika Mildner. She is the Executive Director of the Aspen Institute Germany, and also she is a political economist.
So we definitely want your comments and questions, as I mentioned, and I just want to share a few from our community post already. A lot of you guys with lots of diverse opinions, which is fantastic. At Overworlder said, "How's the price of eggs and groceries going, Donnie?" So I'm trying to channel the vibe of your comment. We also have Timothea Almeida, 7299, saying, well, imagine playing with friends who never played fairly and just used your kindness and charity for their own benefit. Presumably, Timothy is a supporter of Trump's tariffs. And we also have at Tianyi Tian saying, Mexico and Canada surrendered so fast. That's unexpected, with a big thumbs up sign. And I think that our guests might beg to differ about whether they surrendered or not, and we will analyse that.
Yeah, so some good comments. Do please keep them going. Pablo, very keen with that poll.
I am.
Now you're allowed to tell us about the poll.
Thank you. Sorry about that, guys. I'm very keen to get everyone informed about this poll. So, what's Trump really up to with tariffs? That's the question for this week. Now, we have four options. Pure chaos, he wants disruption. Power play for political leverage. America first, protecting US jobs. And a big reset of US trade relations. Now, do try and choose one. You might have multiple answers there, but do send us in your comments and vote in the poll, and we'll give you the results of that later on in the show.
Thank you very much, Pablo. OK, before we go any further, I think over to Jared, just to give us a bit of a 101 on what's been going on, because as Melissa said, this has been so fast-moving over the past few days of where we are, where we thought we were, where we actually are.
Yeah, exactly. Indeed, I'm going to get into all that. But before I do, a lot of people are probably wondering this week, now, what are tariffs again? What do they do? What are they supposed to do? And who pays for them, really? And I found this explanation from Australian finance journalist Chris Kohler really interesting and entertaining. I hope you do too. Let's play it now.
What's a tariff? It's a way to make imports more expensive.
Why would you do that?
Well, in theory, they redirect people towards local manufacturing. They bring in a bit of extra money for the government, and they're used as a trade bargaining tool. And in practice? They jack up prices for everyone and start trade wars.
Oh. Hey, can I have a bite of your sandwich?
It'll cost you 30% of those barbecue shapes.
I want your whole can of drink then.
No deal.
I'll make my own sandwich.
I haven't got any bread.
Well, thanks a lot to Chris Kohler for that expert explanation, and I really hope we're all going to be more generous with each other in sharing our sandwiches and our barbecue shapes and our cans of drink. Exactly. Now, it's fair to say probably that Donald Trump hasn't watched that video, but I think it's a kind of a really helpful basis to talk about where we are now. As you've just said, Donald Trump is a fan of tariffs. He's talked about them in his campaign. We've seen a lot of action since he took office on January the 20th. He wants to use them to boost American manufacturing and end what he says are unfair trade imbalances, which is what Chris Kohler was talking about. Now, I'm going to bring up a chart from the United States Census that shows the three biggest trading partners according to the US Census Bureau. So they are Mexico, I'm going to circle them for us, Mexico, Canada, and China. Sorry, I'll do that a bit more neatly so people can see. Mexico, Canada, and China. Let's talk about the first two, Mexico and Canada here. Now, Donald Trump had threatened 25% tariffs on all imports from these countries. He says to get them to reduce illegal migration and the flow of drugs like fentanyl, which is a synthetic opioid that authorities blame for the deaths of thousands of people a year in the United States. Now, there are a lot of opinions about whether it is really about fentanyl. I'm going to bring up a Wall Street Journal article now. The editorial board of the WSJ is calling this the dumbest trade war in history. And regarding the drugs, they say drugs may be an excuse since Mr. Trump has made it clear that he likes tariffs for their own sake, right?
And the Wall Street Journal is a conservative newspaper, at least on their editorial side, that usually supports what Republicans and also Trump does.
Interesting. So this is a very outspoken position, I guess, for the WSJ to take in this regard, as you say. The tariffs did look like they were going to happen on Mexico and Canada until earlier this week when at the last minute a deal was struck. Now, we know Donald Trump loves a deal. This deal, as we understand, was reached on the phone. Basically, these tariffs are going to be paused for 30 days, during which negotiations will take place about what's going to happen from now on. So Canada and Mexico, it said, agreed to tackle migration and drugs, and Trump in turn is said to have said that he'll try and keep guns out of Mexico, limit the flow of guns into Mexico. So that's Canada and Mexico. Let's talk about China briefly. There have been tit-for-tat measures this week. The US imposed 10% tariffs on all Chinese imports. This is on top of the ones that already are in place. And I'm just going to remind myself, China responded then by imposing levies on US coal, LNG, crude oil, as well as farm equipment and some cars. So that's China, which I know we're going to discuss. One of the big questions too, Donald Trump's made some comments about Europe. So a lot of people here are wondering, is Europe next? And that's something we're going to be talking about shortly with Alex von Nahmen.
We are, exactly. We're just about to bring her in. But just before that, Melissa, just talking about China and with your China hat on very briefly, do you think that that was a surprise to President Xi that Trump was so gung-ho about tariffs? Or, I mean, he had promised higher tariffs, then it was only 10%. Did they actually get away with a fairly good deal?
I mean, it's a very interesting question, and I would say that for now the Chinese response is fairly muted. I think it's a wait and see. They don't want to escalate, and we know that the Chinese can actually use much stronger language. If we recall, I think so many of us might not want to think about the period of the COVID and lockdowns, but the diplomats, the Chinese wolf warriors, had very strong verbiage during that time period in terms of their diplomacy. And we're seeing a little less of that right now. So I think they're in a wait-and-see mode.
This is something I was hearing yesterday from our colleague James Chater in Taiwan. He was saying that actually, yeah, as you say, Beijing has been a lot quieter than expected in the week since Donald Trump has taken office. That is sort of making everyone question a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Well, we will try and talk a little bit more about China a little bit later on. But as Jared, thank you very much. And as you just said, Alexandra von Nahmen is the person that we want to bring in next. Hi, Alexandra. Thank you very much for joining us. Alexandra is the DW Bureau Chief of Brussels, so she's joining us from Brussels. Also, she has another hat, or a previous hat, should I say. She was also the Bureau Chief of our Washington Bureau, so we will talk perhaps a little bit about that later on. But first of all, let's stick with Brussels, let's stick with Europe. Before we go any further, Alexandra, I think it would be good to just listen to Donald Trump himself talking about Europe and talking about the possibility, it seems very likely in the words that he uses, but the possibility of tariffs. So let's just listen to him from just a couple of days ago.
It will definitely happen with the European Union, I can tell you that, because they've really taken advantage of us. And, you know, we have over a $300 billion deficit. They don't take our cars, they don't take our farm products, they take almost nothing. And we take everything from them, millions of cars, tremendous amounts of food and farm products. The European Union it's an atrocity, what they've done.
So there we have it, Donald Trump there laying into Europe, calling the European Union an atrocity. Pretty strong language there. What do you think it is, Alexandra, that Donald Trump literally appears to hate so much about Brussels?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I think it's really difficult to answer that because we don't know, is it really about trade? Or is it just about bringing a deal home that he can sell as a big success? It was the case with Canada and Mexico, as you guys just mentioned, right? It was not about trade so much. It was about border security, it was about immigration, it was about fentanyl. So we are here talking to officials in Brussels and asking them, do you think it is really about trade? But when we talk about the substance of what Trump had to say there, of course, he has a point in pointing out that the U.S. has a trade deficit when it comes to the trade in goods with the European Union, because the European member states, they do export more goods into the U.S. and then they import from the U.S. But his database is a bit murky there because, according to official figures, we are talking about 150 billion US dollars. He was talking about 300 billion US dollars. So we don't know what his database is.
Well, we've got some data, or Jared has got some data actually. Jared, maybe you could just talk us through what you can show us.
Yeah, Wade, if you wouldn't mind bringing up this graph that I've got, Wade's in our control room. This is a Financial Times graph taking data on imports to the US from the US Census Bureau up to November 2024. This grey dotted line here, I'm just waving my mouse over it, is where the EU sits. Now, we were talking about Mexico. Mexico is the biggest single trade partner, but the EU as a bloc collectively is greater, and it sits here on this grey dotted line above Mexico. Now, I'm going to just minimise this and talk about the trade deficit. Now, this is something that Donald Trump is very interested in. This is data, again, from the US Census Bureau about trading goods with the EU from 2024. Now, we have an exact figure here, negative $213 million, $0.6 million, which is the trade deficit between the EU and the United States, a very hefty trade deficit.
Alexandra, it's not the 300 million, it's not the 150 million. According to the US Census data, it's 213,676,000, so somewhere in between.
Yes, but of course we also have to say that when it comes to the trade in services, it is the U.S. That has a trade surplus in this area. So that is also something that we need to take into account. And in general, I have to say that there is, of course, a lot of fear what that could mean should Donald Trump really push through with his threats and impose tariffs on goods coming out from Europe being exported to the U.S., because the consequences could be very harmful for the U.S., but of course also for the European Union. As you can imagine, we have now this discussion going on how the EU could respond. And at the same time, we have this discussion that is going on about Europe's competitiveness with a lot of reports being issued and stating that the EU is lagging behind its competitors, its economic rivals, the US and China. So there is a lot of concern that in this time where the European Union would need to invest more, to become more competitive, to invest more in new products, in bringing innovation back to the European Union, that this is a bad time to have a potential trade war with the United States.
And Alexandra, I just also want to share what's happening in chat. We have Grant Graff saying, nice to know we're fighting our friends. And speaking of unpredictability, it is impacting at least one of our audience viewers in chat saying, Garner Jazz 58 saying, I moved all my stock into cash. This is way too unpredictable for my blood. And Existential Void saying, general advice with Trump, look at what happens rather than what people, including Trump, says will happen. The guessing game is a fool's game with this one. And that's the tricky thing, right? He keeps saying one thing about tariffs and doing another thing, then saying another thing. And I mean, we're just 2 weeks into this and we are getting so many different messages on what he plans to do.
And Alexandra, I just want you...
Yes, and you...
Sorry. Do please answer.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you guys so right about it, because it is about disruption. It is about, anticipating what kind of consequences those tariffs could have, what consequences they're already having on the markets. And actually, officials here in Brussels, they were hoping that they dodged a bullet after Trump announced tariffs on Canada and Mexico. They were hoping that those tariffs would have such big consequences and a big impact on the so important industries in the U.S. that then the backlash would be just difficult to imagine, and that could convince Trump, after imposing tariffs on Canada and Mexico, not to go ahead and impose additional tariffs on Europe. So that was the hope here. That was the thinking. Now we will see what will indeed happen in the next weeks and months.
Alex, do you mind if I correct myself? I was talking about million. Of course, I should have said billion. So the figures I was showing earlier were billion. I apologise for that. So, yeah.
All right, thank you. This is the problem with charts and numbers. And then, Alexandra, I just saw you're talking there about how Europe is trying, what they were hoping for in terms of the tariffs that were perhaps going to come in.
Sorry, guys, I can't hear anything.
Can you hear me now? Are you able to hear me now, Alexandra?
Oh, maybe Alexandra can hear me.
Can you hear us?
Oh, she can't hear me either.
Okay. Well, we'll just try to bring Alexandra back in a moment. But I thought what I was about to do was play some interesting takes from European leaders with this whole issue of tariffs. But I would like Alexandra to listen to that. So we'll just pause that until we come back to her.
Okay.
But just what we were, what Alexandra was saying there, that if these tariffs had been put in place in Mexico, in Canada, that it would have had some kind of impact perhaps on Donald Trump and persuading him that maybe it isn't the best way to go. But of course, he pulled back from the brink, so that didn't happen and everything's still to play for.
Yeah, I mean, I just actually, while we're discussing this, I also want to share another comment from chat saying, this user saying, America first for Americans, Canada first for Canadians, Mexico first for the Mexicans, EU first for the Europeans. No hard feelings, do your thing, all the best. I mean, this is the brave new world we have been sort of thrown into in the last 2 weeks, and it's just really tricky to navigate. I mean, there's a tendency for, go ahead,
we're so
Pablo.
interconnected,
Yeah.
you know, economically speaking. I think that's the big thing that often we all forget, you know, that a lot of the products, just talking about, look, here in the European Union, you know, we don't often think, okay, the bread that I'm eating, where are the products that are in that bread coming from? Same in the United States, all the way up to, you know, the car that you're driving or the train that you're taking to your office every morning or whatever. All the products that go into making those, a lot of the times, this interconnected world that we're in, it's going to impact us. So with regards to these tariffs, I mean, you know, economically speaking, I think it was great, that video before, the prices are going to go up. You know, like people are going to be impacted. And I think this comment from that you just read there before, okay, right, I see how you view the world, but unfortunately the system that we've created is not that system.
Yeah.
So if you're going to change it, it's going to have a profound impact. And who suffers the most in society? At the end, those who need it most.
But, I mean, what Trump and Musk both say is they acknowledge that it's going to be painful and that we're just going to take the pain, or ordinary Americans, ordinary citizens around the world will take the pain. Easy for billionaires to say that.
Very true.
Absolutely.
I'm hoping that we've got Alexandra von Nahmen back now with us from Brussels. We had a few technical issues there. Alexandra, are you able to hear me now?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful.
Sorry about the technical issues.
So we always have, there are often technical
It
issues.
happens.
So, yes. What I was going to do next was just play some of the reactions from European leaders that we've had over the past couple of days when it comes to this threat of tariffs. So let's listen to what they have to say and then just unpack some of those thoughts.
I want to be clear. Europe will safeguard its economic and national security.
As a strong economic area, we can organise things ourselves, and we can also react to customs policies with customs policies.
We have to propose something which could be interesting and attractive for United States.
There are no winners in trade wars. If United States and the US start the trade war, then the one laughing on the side is China.
If we are attacked on trade, Europe, as a true power, would have to stand up for itself and react.
I think that we have to do everything to avoid this totally unnecessary and stupid tariff wars.
So that was Donald Tusk, Poland's Prime Minister, ending that little montage with a very strong line there, totally stupid and unnecessary tariff wars. Alexandra, it does seem pretty clear from that EU leaders are taking this threat extremely seriously.
Yes, of course. Because, as they stated in those statements, they know what the consequences could be. And they were preparing for what needs to happen should Donald Trump impose tariffs on European goods. Even before his inauguration, the European Commission, this is the EU's executive body, they were thinking about potential plans. They established a task force at the European Commission, something that was known to us journalists as the Trump Task Force. So they knew what might be coming. They have plans in the drawer how to retaliate, but they don't want to do that because I think that the majority of them still believes that the US is an important partner and friend. So they want to do everything that's possible to avoid a trade war. There are plans to promise him to buy more LNG, liquefied gas. They want to offer him to buy more weapons from the US because, of course, this is a big and important issue for the Europeans to spend more money on their own defense. But if all of that is not working out, if it is necessary, I think they are quite determined to retaliate.
And how
in that case.
How could they retaliate? Do you have any idea what some of those plans could be, Alexandra?
Yes, there are plans, as I said, that are ready to go, so to speak, and apparently they have a majority to follow through with that if necessary. And different options that we are hearing from the officials in Brussels, serious options, I have to say. So they could themselves impose tariffs on U.S. goods targeting sectors of industry. We saw it in 2017 when Donald Trump, in his first term in office, imposed tariffs on European aluminum and steel. The European Union retaliated by targeting whiskey and Harley-Davidson bikes and so on. So now they could go after certain sectors of industry, and they also, and this is, I think, really big, they could also target companies owned by individuals close to Donald Trump, like Elon Musk, for instance. So there is this plan that there were some reports about that already in the European media, that the European Commission could decide to target U.S. services. For instance, the big tech companies, and that could be something that I guess Donald Trump would need to consider should the European Union really go that far. And this is maybe interesting also for you guys. It's called here as it's dubbed a bazooka tool, which is quite a strong word.
Okay. And is that the anti-coercion instrument that I was reading about? Like you're talking about Musk. So it's the Silicon Valley, these big owners, these big billionaires, the bazooka. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say
the bazooka is about that, but it's more just. Let me add that very quickly. It's more about, it's an instrument that they can use if they have proof that a state or states that they want to force them to change their policy. If Trump were to say, I'm using economic means to force Denmark to hand over Greenland, for instance, that is something that would be seen as a proof and a potential occasion or evidence to use this anti-coercion instrument.
Alexandra, I was just going to say that we have a very smart audience. Lorenzo also pretty much said a similar thing, who's tuning in. The EU could simply start by punishing American companies doing business overseas, kind of aligned with what you were saying in terms of targeting big tech or targeting Musk companies and stuff like that.
And one thing that you also just mentioned there, Alexandra, was defence. We have been talking so far about trade, tariffs, but this whole area of defence, of course, you alluded to it yourself, that Europe relies so much on the US for defence. Just look at what's going on in Ukraine. So is this also an area that, well, I guess that Europe has to be careful about, that they can't upset the US too much?
Yes, that is very much true because, as you said, with the war still raging in Ukraine on the European Union's doorstep, they need to think about Europe's defense. And if they are too bold when it comes to trade with the US or retaliating in response to potential tariffs imposed by the Trump administration, Donald Trump could say, all right, then you want to retaliate, you want to go after X, for instance, then I would withdraw all American troops from Europe. I will not anymore provide the nuclear defense umbrella that Europe needs so much. And that, of course, is something that the Europeans are aware of. So it's a very difficult balancing act to show that they are not afraid when it comes to trade and to potential threats there coming from the new U.S. administration. but on the other hand, they have to act cautiously to make sure that there won't be any big consequences with regard to Europe's defense. And I think this is quite a difficult situation. As a powerhouse, economic powerhouse, Europe could be much bolder. But not spending enough on defense, it's now, also a reason not to be as bold as some of them would like to be.
Good point. Thank you very much, Alexandra. Please do stay with us. But I'd just like to bring in our next guest. Dr. Stormy-Annika Mildner is the Executive Director of the Aspen Institute Germany and also a political economist. Stormy, I think you have just been listening to what we have been talking about with regard to Donald Trump and tariffs and Europe, and then just as Alexandra was talking about their defence. I would just, sticking with Europe first of all. We know that obviously Brussels is taking this seriously, but do you think that they are taking it seriously enough, given what has been going on over the past few days?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to join this really great discussion round. I would say that the decision makers in Brussels know very well how serious the situation is. What we never should forget in our discussions is that we are extremely close partners economically and politically. We are trading a lot within the European context. 60% of our trade takes place among ourselves, but outside of ourselves, outside of the EU, the US is our most important trading economic partner and also investment partner. So, and given our own economic situation, the low growth rates in the EU as a whole, but also low growth rates in the economic powerhouses of the EU, in Germany most specifically, but also in France and some other countries, it would hurt if our close relationship with the US is threatened. So yes, I think it's taken seriously. On the other hand, we are also not as much of a geopolitical actor, the EU is, as the US. We are 27 member states. It takes a lot longer to find common ground. We also have to look at different interests and reconcile those interests, which makes it also difficult to decide on counter tariffs, because tariffs also always hurt us. And our reaction time is usually a little longer. We don't have a common defense policy yet. We are just not as fast. And also, the EU is very much rooted in a rules-based system. And we have a strong feeling towards multilateral approaches, not unilateral ones. So there's a lot of hesitancy towards what we just heard, the anti-coercion instrument, and what really to use.
Stormy, nice to meet you. This is Melissa. I just want to throw in a comment from Samael, who's tuning in, saying the EU is not equipped to fight America and Russia at the same time. I wonder if you can sort of expand on that.
Well, I mean, first of all, I wouldn't equate those two. And I also would not equate a real war and an invasion of another country with the imposition of tariffs. So I think those are two different issues. Having said this, we certainly need the United States also for the security of Europe, for our integrity and for our safety. So we need our relationship. And that certainly also plays into the issue of how we deal with the trade issues. And we heard in the previous comment that our investment in our own defense is going to be one of the issues which Trump is going to raise. I mean, he's already done that, right? We have that 5% goal of defense spending now in the room, which we will certainly not be able to fulfill. There's the idea of Europeans buying more defense equipment from the United States, more LNG and so on. So these will be important, so to say, deal-making, bargaining issues. But what is quite clear for our security, because we don't have the necessary defense capabilities and capacities, we need the partnership. That is very clear.
What do you think it is, Stormy, that Donald Trump really wants from Europe?
So first of all, I think this brings us back to the issue of what the motivations are for the whole trade policy and the tariffs as well. And I think some of this we have already seen during the first Trump administration, and some things are more extreme this time around. What I mean, in general, I think he's not so keen on on trade. And in general, he seems to perceive trade more as a zero-sum game. So if you win, then I'm going to lose, and the other way around. So this goes a little bit counter to what we economists would say about trade, that it is a positive win for everybody involved, and that, and we heard it in one of the comments earlier, that a trade war only creates losers. That's not his thinking. And his thinking is also more, if you have a trade surplus vis-a-vis the United States, this is a sign for that you are trading unfairly. So he has a different perception of trade. He also has a different perception of multilateral institutions than we do. And then I think there are three goals he is pursuing, which are also a little bit contradictory to each other. And the first one is using tariffs to create a level playing field. So to go against unfair trade practices abroad, we've seen that in the first administration with regard to the China issue. And he uses 301 tariffs to do so. The second one, we had not seen so much, or the rhetoric for this, in the first Trump administration, and that is tariffs as revenue tool for the state. So getting the revenue, and then on the other side, reducing taxes, also the income tax, and then filling the gap through tariffs. And the last one, and that's what we've been talking about before, and you've been talking intensely with your other guests, is using tariffs as bargaining chip, as tool to, on a very transactional way, to get something from other partners, which are not necessarily related to trade itself. And why I said in the beginning that this is a little bit contradictory. If you want to use this as a revenue tool, then you would not get rid of the tariffs anymore because you need to get the revenues. If you want to use it as a bargaining tool, then you also need to offer taking it away again. So it's a little bit contradictory, and so we have to see where it takes us.
Yeah, because I was going to say that's the situation we seem to be in at the moment, isn't it? That he's used it as a bargaining tool and then said, now we'll have a 30-day pause, but they're still there. There's still this threat that in 30, this is for Mexico and Canada, obviously, but in 30 days they may be back on the table. Nobody quite knows. Do you think that that is something that Donald Trump enjoys then, being able to wield that kind of power?
I don't know if he enjoys this. I'm not that close, but it is certainly a strategy. I mean, one of the strategies he seems to pursue in all areas is to disrupt, and I think this is something which he is very good in doing over the last couple of weeks. He's creating a lot of uncertainty with this, and he is keeping us very much on our toes, and everybody is thinking about making deals in a very transactional way. This is not how we did trade policy over the last 40, 50 years. Trade policy was more rules-based. It was more embedded in the World Trade Organization and its rules. It was more embedded in bilateral and regional trade agreements, also with clear rules. Now it's become very transactional, and this creates really a challenge for policymakers as well as for the business community, because you don't know if this is if you make a deal, if that's going to be the end of it, or if there's going to be another deal necessary, because the tariffs could always come back or be re-implemented.
There's a fact check maybe or a comment for either Stormy or Alexandra, but Warco is saying no one ever talks about the EU tariffs on the U.S. It's only bad when we do it. Maybe we can get some clarification on that.
Yeah, Alexandra, we'd love to hear your comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that there are tariffs, but it's really then in that case about trade and making sure that there is fair trade and fair or level playing field there. I think that is what it is about when it comes to the EU dealing with its trade partners. And if I may, I just wanted to jump in because you were talking about what Donald Trump's goals are and about this transactional nature of dealing with him, or the way he is dealing with friends and allies. And I remember covering Donald Trump during his first term in office, and that was a time in 2017 when the US and they were on the brink of a trade war, and we had a visit. Jean-Claude Juncker, the then head of the European Commission, was visiting the White House. He had a meeting with Donald Trump. We knew there is not much that can happen to solve the crisis, actually, but we saw in the Oval Office that both men had quite a chemistry. They seemed to get along. You know, Donald Trump was patting Juncker's knee and so on, and we thought, oh, maybe there will be a deal or not. But then nothing happened during the first couple of hours, and we were about to leave the White House premises when we were called back because there was a press conference organized spontaneously in the Rose Garden. It turned out that Juncker was able to convince Trump not to impose further tariffs on European goods, and he did so by promising him that the European Union will buy soybeans and LNG, and for Trump it was so to speak, enough to be happy, because he had some problems with the U.S. farmers, and both men stood alongside each other in the Rose Garden, and they were able to say, well, we agreed, so there will be no trade war. In an interview later on, Juncker told me that he did not even have, the authority to promise anything to Donald Trump then, and still it worked. So it tells you a lot about what is the nature of dealing with Donald Trump. Of course, it will be much difficult now, I guess, him being in the White House for a second term, but this strategy was successful then.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much for that. Stormy, did you want to respond to that?
I would love to come in there as well. I mean, we were a little lucky at that time because the soybean imports by the EU actually did increase, but that had nothing to do with that trade deal. And the same with LNG imports. And I'm not so sure if that is going to be enough this time around. And in addition, there was also a deal on lobsters where the two sides agreed on a zero tariff lobster trade. And I also think that that is not going to be enough this time. I also wanted to come just briefly back to the issue of that we do have tariffs in the transatlantic trade relationship. And I can only invite your listener to take a look at the tariff profiles of the two, EU and the US, which you can find at the World Trade Organization. And then you can see that we don't have free trade. So we have tariffs on both sides, and there are different heights for these tariffs. So we have higher tariffs on some agricultural products, especially when it involves dairy. It's a very sensitive issue for us. The US has higher tariffs on other products. So in general, on average, we have slightly higher tariffs than the US, but it's not such a big difference. But it has been in the past repeatedly also attempted to get rid of these tariffs because they are impediments to trade, and the same with regard to regulatory standards. And I just want to remind all of us that we did have the TTIP negotiations, which now seem very, very long ago. But this is something we need to remember. We don't have a free trade agreement. We do not have free trade. There are tariffs. But the tariffs we are now talking about would be additional tariffs and across the board. 20% or 25% of all products.
And also just worth pointing out, of course, that there has been this free trade agreement with Canada, the US and Mexico, but that still doesn't seem to have stopped Donald Trump with these threats on his neighbours there. I just park this conversation shortly, just for a short amount of time. Pablo, I'm hoping now that we can come to you just to find out what's been going on in the chat.
The chat has been very lively today. Great comments coming in from everyone. Melissa has been reading out your comments and also actually engaging with our viewers as well. A big shout out, of course, to Carolina Pilena, who, as always, is there, keeping an eye on the chat. The poll is... it's interesting because it's tied. Do you want me to go to the poll yet, or do you want me to wait?
We'll keep that.
I've got a couple of comments
to look forward to.
There's definitely some that are really jumping out at me. I think a lot are related to, for example, the EU, which you've now been answering. But one here from Nile Chaturvedi. Tariffs could raise billions for the American government. They could use it to finance corporate tax cuts promised in the manifesto. But over the long term, they'll hurt in terms of inflation, misallocation of resources. That's an interesting one, which maybe our guests can actually look at as well. And there's also a comment here which was about, actually also from Nile, which I wanted to read out. He said, the EU is discovering what Asia always knew, that the US is a superpower. Is a transactional superpower, which I thought was also quite interesting.
That is a nice bridge, I think, for us just to move on from talking about the EU specifically, but making this a little bit more global. And you did mention there, Stormy, China a few minutes ago, and we did talk a bit about China at the beginning of this stream with Melissa, because Melissa, I think it's fair to call you a China expert.
For better or worse.
For better or worse. So she never escapes that title. But just maybe we can bridge it by, we've been talking about the EU, talk about China. Could Donald Trump's moves force the EU perhaps to look more towards China rather than the other way around? I know that obviously Donald Trump doesn't want either the US or the EU to be doing as much trade with China, but could it have the reverse effect?
Well, I mean, what's for certain is that the relationship between the United States and China is a little bit different than our relationship. So first of all, we are more dependent economically on China, and we also have a lot more production in China than US companies have. And also with regard to trade, we are more dependent on China, specifically Germany. So there is a difference. But also how we perceive China, how risky we see China and how much of a systemic competitor China is, there's also a slight difference, I would say. So if you look at polls in the United States, China is perceived as the biggest threat to US security. If you look at polls here, the result is a little bit different. Having said this, I think we, at least during the Biden administration, we came to the issue from different sides, but we moved closer to each other. So there's a greater risk perception now also in the EU, and greater willingness also to go against or after unfair trade practices in China. We saw that with the countervailing tariffs on Chinese e-vehicles last year. There's also a greater willingness to think about using the anti-coercion instrument, the new and competitiveness instrument, and some of the other trade defense instruments against China. Having said this, I think one of the expectations by the Trump administration really is that we de-risk and diversify away from China. And China is going to play a huge part as a topic within our relationship. So when we talk also about this deal with the US and we talk about defense products and so on, I think how we deal with China is going to be part of that deal and that relationship. And I don't think it is going to push us further towards China. I think it's rather going to push us to think a little bit more of how to diversify. Because also among our medium and small-sized enterprises, there is a rethinking of how risky the Chinese market is because of everything which is currently happening there. Yeah. So it's not an easy market.
And there is a comment from one of our listeners, viewers, at Last Chang, in regards to this China issue. Again, a little bit of a fact check. Maybe you want to clarify or even disagree with this statement. But instead of asking for leniency, this person is saying China's determination to fight back on Trump's tariffs will only hurt China more. I guess part of this whole conversation is about which country is going to hurt more.
The winners, the losers.
Yes, from tariffs. And I'm not entirely sure as I said at the start of News Desk, whether China is determined to fight back. Their response has been fairly muted, but I wonder what your thoughts are in terms of China's pain threshold.
It's hard to say. We are starting the US-China trade tit for tat from a different level than the, US-Mexico, Canada, or US-EU tariff threat implementation issue, because we already had seen a very intense tit-for-tat process during the first Trump administration with steeply increasing tariffs, which actually did hurt both sides. So the Trump administration implemented tariffs on steel and aluminum. China answered with also tariffs on a lot of agricultural products, including soybeans. This hurt the US farmers. The government even had to step in to compensate a little bit for that pain. Then tariffs are one thing, but we also saw more strict export controls, more strict investment screening already during the first Trump administration. And all these policies stayed in place during the Biden administration, because there is there are huge differences on lots of policy areas between Democrats and Republicans. But on China, everybody agrees that there needs to be an aggressive and tough policy towards China. So China is answering from a little bit of a different position and from a different tariff level overall. So this additional 10% for China is not, in comparison, as much as it would be for us, because the starting point is differently. Having said this, tariffs always hurt. It hurts individual producers, it hurts the consumers, it makes the relationship more uncertain. And I think China has reacted in the way it did, to react from a position of strength and show, we are going to answer quickly, also with our tariffs and some export controls for rare earth materials, because that is also going to be painful and hurtful. And then we might negotiate again. And also, just as a reminder, under the first Trump administration, a deal one, or phase one and a phase two deal were negotiated, in which China committed to rethink and get rid of some of the uncompetitiveness behavior it pursued. The deals went in the implementation so-so, I would say. The Trump administration was pretty frustrated, but it led to negotiations and it led to a deal last time. And so I think China takes that experience, answers with a position of strength, and then negotiate instead of first offering something and then negotiate.
Stormy, thank you. I'm very conscious of the fact that you have to leave fairly soon. I think we've still got a couple of minutes left with you before you have to jump on or go to another event. We've just briefly talked about China. I see also that India has been taking some preemptive action, for example, slashing import duties on motorcycles. So the point here is that it seems that what Trump has already done has shaken the world, and everybody is on edge and preparing and seeing what they can do to try to dissuade him from putting those in place to target their country.
I find all of this so unfortunate. As an economist, you won't be surprised that I'm not a great fan of tariffs. It disrupts our relationships. It's costly for everybody. And an open and free trading system based on rules embedded in the World Trade Organization would be so much better for everybody. And in addition, the United States, it's such an important partner to so many countries. And it's a wonderful place. So it's really unfortunate the direction we are moving into, but it also would be naive to say, well, trade is going to be the solution for everything, and we should go back to free and fair trade. We live in a different world. So for the EU, this means, and for other countries, to play through different scenarios and see how to react to this with either retaliatory tariffs or with deal makings. But what I really personally hope is that we don't forget about the rules, that we don't forget about trade agreements, as the EU has negotiated with the Mercosur countries, with Mexico, as it is currently negotiating in the Asian region. Those are rules-based agreements. They are extremely important, even more than in the past, I would say. And I really hope that we don't forget about the World Trade Organization with all its faults and problems in dispute settlement. I think it's a good system.
OK, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. Dr. Stormy-Annika Mildner, Aspen Institute Germany, and as we were hearing there, very much a political economist. Thank you for your time. It was great to get your insights.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.
And Alexandra von Nahmen, I hope you are still with us, because I'd just love to get your take on some of what Stormy was just ending with there. I know I'm not asking you for your opinions, but just saying that the world has changed, and although she thinks it's unfortunate from being an economist's point of view, it's the world that we live in, and that everybody's just got to get used to it.
Well, I think that the problem for the Europeans is still that most of them, if not all of them, really believe that the US is an important ally, partner and friend. I had a chance to catch up with the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, and she was convinced that that's still a case. And she was putting a brave face and being very optimistic that even under the new Trump administration, that will be still the case in the future. And I think many here hope that they will be able to agree on a deal with the US administration, offering them to cooperate more when it comes to defense, for instance, because that would be a win-win situation for the US, with the Europeans buying more military equipment, and the Europeans having still this strong, mighty ally, the US, at their side at such a time of uncertainty and crises, and being sure that they still have the US protection. So I think that the hope here is that will be the outcome of the whole issue, if possible, that the US and Europe.
Because Alexandra, something that we haven't discussed actually is how, of course, Europe itself is divided. With Donald Trump has some big allies within the EU now, and for example, Hungary, Italy. Do you think that he will try to pick off those countries and try to, form bilateral deals in some way at the expense of other countries that perhaps he's not on such good terms with, Germany being a good example?
That could be the case. You mentioned Italy, and the Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, has been praised by Trump. I think he said something like she is a wonderful woman, and she has a pretty close relationship, as it seems, with Elon Musk. You mentioned Hungary. Viktor Orban has been praised by Trump as well. So Trump could try to kind of forge a very special relationship with Italy and Hungary, with their leaders. And the point is that, as mentioned by our experts, and we know it, covering EU politics, that we are talking not about one very firm bloc of 27 members. We are talking about different governments having different interests, and they are not always on the same page. And speaking with German diplomats, I have to say that they are quite afraid that the European Union, should there be tariffs imposed by the US, that the European Union will not remain united, because they know that Trump is quite obsessed with Germany, with German cars, for instance. So what happens if he decides to impose tariffs on German cars? Will the other members of the European Union say, hey, we are with you, Germany, we are supporting you, let's retaliate together? Or will they, say, oh, I'm sorry, Germany, but, there is not so much we can do. So this is, I think, big concern when you speak with German diplomats here in Brussels.
Alexandra von Nahmen, thank you so much for joining us from Brussels. We really appreciate your time because you have been with us pretty much throughout this entire stream. So thank you. That was great.
Thank you for having me.
And particularly interesting hearing, of course, some of that story from when you were actually in Washington as well, and you were covering Trump for his first presidency. So that was very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And before...
Bye.
Thank you. And I just wanted to talk to you because Alexandra there was talking about these different personalities within Europe. We've talked a little bit about President Xi, but this personality seems to be so key. Take Mexico, for example, with
Claudia Sheinbaum, of
yeah,
course,
who's
been. She gives a daily press conference, and this is a common. I think it was brought in actually. Relatively recently in Mexico anyway, and
but she appears every day before the media.
That's right, and has a conversation, and all the questions are put to her, and obviously the issue of relations with the United States has come up, starting with the renaming of the Gulf of Mexico, which was there's a bit of tongue-in-cheek with regards to perhaps Mexico calling the United States of America, America Mexicana, which was what it was referred to back in the 16th century, I believe. And of course, but it's very much in the delivery as well that Claudia Sheinbaum has in Spanish. There's a touch of irony in how she speaks. So she delivers her message, which is very clear. It's in a very direct manner, which of course is, which says a lot because Claudia Sheinbaum has obviously had to deal over the course of her career with many men in politics, and I'm sure she's well used to being able to deal with Donald Trump-style characters. But she seems to have been able to negotiate quite well with Donald Trump, and we've seen that in the past few days. But of course, for Mexico, there's a lot on the table there as well, close relations. And I thought it was interesting the other day when she was talking about when Donald Trump was mentioning how fentanyl and immigrants were essentially being allowed to cross into the United States. And she just sort of flatly said, well, yeah, but of course, all the cartels in Mexico all their guns are coming from the United States. So, it was sort of playing the hardball game, which is very different to what we've seen on the other side of the United States with Canada. Of course, Canada's political situation very different at the moment.
Very different.
I wonder if you can clarify. This is a very interesting comment that was posted quite a while ago, but we haven't forgotten. We try to bring it in at the right time. But B. Carr saying it was a risky strategy, but it worked. Canada and Mexico are starting to make deals with Trump. But what I'm hearing from what you've just told us, Pablo, is that they didn't really make any deals.
No, but I think that's as well. I can't remember which one of our guests was saying it before. I think it was perhaps Alexandra. I mean, the issue is that, you can go into a meeting with Donald Trump and you can I think often it's this transactional nature that Donald Trump has, right? So Claudia Sheinbaum, we don't know, but went into this meeting with Donald Trump, and then hours later, it was all of a sudden...
She came out. Well, we can actually play let's just quickly listen to her so everybody knows who we're talking about and we can hear her. Obviously, this is dubbed into English, but you can hopefully hear a little bit of her underneath.
He made several proposals, and finally we reached an agreement. We agreed to put more National Guards on the northern border to protect the border and prevent drug trafficking, and in particular the trafficking of fentanyl from Mexico to the United States. I explained that we wanted him to pause the tariffs from the very first moment. So in this case, we reached that agreement.
She reached that agreement.
She reached that agreement. I think the interesting
thing... now, we have to say that we don't know what's going to happen in 30 days' time.
Well, you can kind of see what I mean about the delivery of Claudia Sheinbaum. She has this very relaxed manner and very sort of direct and matter-of-fact style, which... I was reading, I follow the Spanish media a lot, and it's something that seems to work with Donald Trump for now, at least.
Can I say that, and maybe it's lost in translation, but I know a little bit of Spanish. Did feel like she was talking to everyone, and everyone was in on this secret and joke, and
yeah, I mean, it could be
we're
taken
all kind
like
of
that.
like dealing with this thing, this
But
Trump
I think that's
thing.
what I mean when this sort of tongue-in-cheek style kind of press conference that took place a couple of weeks ago about the Gulf of Mexico came up. I think we really could see there, because it was sort of, there was a bit of humour to it, but behind it all, it was a very clear message of like, listen, we're not going to just sort of accept absolutely everything that you say or throw at us. And I think also Claudia Sheinbaum probably made it very clear to Donald Trump, listen, we're very important as well for the United States, you know, with regards to trade. And we need you guys, but you also need us as well. So don't undermine the importance of Mexico. And I think that that is central to all of this here. Obviously, we didn't get all the details from that news conference, but I think the relationship between Mexico and, personally, it's going to be one that I'm going to keep a close eye on, because
it's interesting.
It's a very interesting one, because a lot of, and once again, I think it was Alexandra who said it, I think often with Donald Trump, messages are sort of sent to certain leaders or countries, and then very quickly they're retracted or changed after a conversation. So, you know, it's part of this sort of bluster strategy that we've seen from Donald Trump over the past few weeks. But, you know...
And where are we? Sorry.
No, that's fine.
I just want to say, where are we with President Xi? Because I just heard Trump earlier saying, I'll talk to him at some point, but I'm not rushing it. But we're going to have a conversation. Do we know anything, any update? I mean,
there's no update. I mean, I think that, like I said, the Chinese are not ratcheting up the temperature.
No.
So we'll see what happens. But they have responded, as we discussed earlier, with counter tariffs. The thing is, it's not about just percentages, right? Like, I believe it was Stormy who mentioned these rare earth minerals. It doesn't matter if you have tariffs, a huge percentage, if you happen, as China, to have the most valuable things in the world that semiconductors need. Rare earth minerals, right? Like, I wrote them down. Like, didn't do science major, so got to write it down. But tungsten, tellurium, bismuth, molybdenum, indium. These are the things that the Chinese put export controls on in retaliation. Well, you know, there's an AI arms race going on right now, and they've just made it harder for semiconductors to be made by the Americans, because it's all about the supply chains. Everything is interconnected.
And there was the US did tighten the screws on Chinese small business people, certainly for under 24 hours, didn't they?
For one hot minute. I mean, but it tells you how crazy things are. So what happened was literally overnight in Europe. I guess in the evening in the United States, the U.S. Postal Service announced that they weren't going to allow any packages, parcels, small parcels, from coming in from China and Hong Kong. This has been something that has been discussed for quite some time, that companies like Shein and Temu have been able to sort of avoid taxation by sending things directly from China to the United States that are worth under $800. Then you don't have to pay taxes on it. And just to give you a sense of the volume, 4 million packages, parcels per day in 2024. So we're talking about a lot of stuff coming into the United States from China that most customs is not able to actually check. So the Americans have said and accused the Chinese of sending fentanyl, actually in small batches and small amounts. But also there's a supply chain issue of just what are you sending in? We can't check it. And so on and so forth. So then overnight, the U.S. government appears to have said, no, we're not going to allow any of the parcels. In fact, I was planning to come in and talk about it with you guys. And literally a few minutes before News Desk started, it sounded like Washington, D.C. changed their minds, and now the parcels can come into the United States.
This is what we're dealing with, isn't it?
So, what was your strategy? What was your goal? Did someone just make a decision and then go, oh, there's all these unintended consequences, we never thought about it? And what a government usually does is they do all of this behind the scenes. They do the research, they find out what the unintended consequences are before they implement it. I mean, I'm pretty sure, the Biden administration was concerned about this issue as well. and they were looking into it, and it seems as if they didn't take action on it, or not just the Biden administration, but any government. It doesn't look like they're taking action because they're actually doing the research. Well, here, what it feels like over the first 2 weeks is Trump kind of just researching on the fly in front of us, and when things don't work out, we also find out that he changes his mind. So that's kind of the world we're in right now.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Before we did you? Yes, you must have lots of.
I feel like I went on a rant and I forgot that I really wanted to share DeVos's comment because I think it really hits at what I was trying to say much more eloquently. DeVos saying there's so many legit concerns that Trump's supposedly trying to address, but there's just such better ways to go about it without tarnishing our reputation and giving other nations a reason to opt out.
Yeah. That's a very interesting point.
Good summary.
Pablo, the poll, which I know you wanted to.
I did. I was jumping ahead there before, but
we have to have something to look forward to.
Absolutely. So I mean, like I said today, the chat has been great. Loads of comments, loads of great comments, loads of actual conversations going on in the chat, separate to us, which is always great and always very welcome. So the poll question: what's Trump really up to with tariffs? I hope we've kind of at least answered that, tried to answer that today. Our 4 options: pure chaos, he wants disruption, 36%. Power play for political leverage, 40%. So that's what the majority of people actually thought it's all about, power play for political leverage. America first, protecting US jobs, just 13% of our viewers voted there, and a big reset of US trade relations, 12%. So basically a combination we can sort of summarize of pure chaos, he wants disruption, and power play for political leverage. So there you have it, chaos and
power play.
And power play.
Thank you very much for that. I don't know. Do you think that's a surprise? I would say that that's kind of the conversation that we've just been having.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next 30 days because these paused tariffs are paused, right? I guess that will expire at some point. Let's see what we need to be talking about again in 1 month's time. I guess the clock is ticking. I want you to say those rare earth minerals again, Melissa.
No, but you're absolutely, I just want to jump in. It's absolutely, you're dead right. I mean, it's, the next 30 days, Mexico and Canada, this is deeply concerning for them. I mean, this is a big, this is, their biggest, their trade partners, their neighbours, in theory have a good relationship with each other, and we've got this moment now that we can wait for, but I will be keeping a close eye on what's going on in Mexico and in Canada.
And of course, any moment, the EU, everyone is waiting for that as well.
Yeah,
and everyone
absolutely.
else. Thank you so much. Thank you, Pablo. Thank you very much, Jared. Thank you, Melissa, particularly for all your insights on China and what's going on there. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's been great to have you. Thank you for all your comments.
Yeah, super smart group of people joining us, so thank you.
And we will give you a good idea of what we're going to talk about 24 hours before our stream next week. So do try and get onto our community post, and we will let you know when we have decided. We'll see you next week.
See you. Bye-bye.